Welcome to Know the Love of Christ. Hello, and welcome back to Know the Love of Christ. If you were with us on the last episode, then you know that we covered Mark chapter 3, verses 7 through 35. We discussed the great crowd pushing against Jesus and the unclean spirits, and we also giggled at Jesus' sense of humor while he was calling his 12. We discussed blasphemy against the Holy Spirit and being a part of his family. Today, we will be covering Mark chapter 4, verses 1 through 20. So if you would like to pause and read those verses, go ahead, and we will get started on Mark 4, 1 through 20.
All right, so let's go ahead and dive in. When we look at this text, these 20 verses, this is really the first parable in Mark that we see completely discussed out. If you look back in chapter 3, verse 23, it talks about him speaking to them in parables. And I'm sorry, it does go through that parable of Satan casting Satan out. Verses 1 through 9 are the parable spoken, and then verses 10 through 20 is where Jesus is explaining that parable to his disciples and apostles. So do either of you have anything you want to share for the first 9 verses?
Well, in the beginning it says, and he began to teach beside the sea. I don't know if we discussed this on the podcast or maybe I was in a Bible class or something, but about Jesus teaching, it's not uncommon for him to be near the sea or something like that. And I just thought maybe it's a favorable place for Jesus. Did we discuss that on here? Did we discuss that?
I don't think
No?
we have,
Okay.
no.
All right, well, I think somebody had said something to the effect of like Jesus probably taught on the sea because like I guess like it would be good acoustics, so like everybody
I have notes
could
on
really
that.
hear him and stuff. And I had never thought about that. I mean I didn't think anything like that. I just thought maybe he just likes teaching by the sea. But I've just kind of started once that was made, I've just kind of started paying attention to the fact that like he's always at a sea. And then I think about like obviously there's a bank, so he can be further out, people are able to see him better, and you can have a great crowd of people. But yeah, somebody said it had something to do with the acoustics. I mean, I just thought that was kind of interesting. That's not really me diving into the verses.
Well, it was a mountainous area, so yeah, it was good for acoustics.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
that's what I found.
You don't catch Brittany in too many mountains.
Yeah.
You don't catch Brittany on too many camping trips either. So it's not like she would know.
Yeah.
I just thought that was interesting.
Yeah, from what I found in the background, it said that it would be great acoustics that would carry his voice, and not necessarily this setting, but it mentioned that there's one cave near Capernaum that allowed as many as 7,000 people to hear one person speaking in the center of the cove.
Oh,
I was like, man.
Wow.
Kind of neat.
Yeah, I thought it was neat.
What I thought was neat was rather than being ready with a boat, like he got into the boat to teach this time. Like chapter 3, verse 9, he's like, have the boat ready.
Mm-hmm.
This time, it wasn't because of fear of being crushed, but it was to teach.
Yeah.
Right. But also I was thinking in relation to what we discussed on the last episode, he wouldn't be crushed on the boat.
Well, yeah, right. Yeah.
He'd have some space, as Brittany was saying. Give me my 6 feet. He had more than 6 feet, hopefully.
You know what I thought of? What maybe it reminded me of Exodus 14. Moses and the multitude at the sea, they were desperate and angry facing the sea, that they had to face the sea. Like, here come the Egyptians, and look at you. You took us out of here. Now we can just die out here. But here's Jesus in the sea, and the multitude's desperate again, but they're wanting healing this time. And it's not an angry thing. The sea and God is something there,
Yeah, there is a lot throughout the Gospels about the
Yeah.
sea. And I mean, at the end of this chapter, we'll see that again, but we won't discuss that in this episode. That'll be next episode.
I can't wait. I got something.
Yeah.
A parable, like you said, Stephanie, this is the first parable. When this is the first one in Mark, recorded, except for the Satan against Satan. This is the one of the 2 parables that's recorded that has explanations. that's
Right.
recorded. The first one is, there's a parable of the tares in Matthew 13 that's explained, which is the same. I think it's the same as this one, right? Or very similar. But a parable is, you hear in class or we tell the kids, it's an earthly story with a heavenly meaning, right?
Yes.
But basically, it's a simple story, easy to understand, because it involves people, places, or things that would be familiar to the listener. So these people, places, or things represented heavenly things, whether actual beings such as angels or heavenly morals and expectations. So the point was to teach, and that's why Jesus would speak to them in parables. The listener would and could understand if he were listening and seeking to learn. He often ends in his parables with "he who has an ear," like in verse 9.
Yeah.
Those with hardened hearts would have a hard time understanding, and it usually hardened their hearts even more.
Right. And what you were saying, there's a lot of suggestion around who his audience would have been. And a lot of people suppose it would be Galilean farmers for this area because he used so many agricultural examples.
Well, it could also, chapter 3, 7 through 9, I think it is, 7 and 8, it says how they came from Judea,
True.
Idumea, beyond the Jordan, Tyre, Sidon. So it could still be these people too.
I was just thinking when I was studying this that there is just, I don't know, and I guess this is true for all the parables, and this is just the first one we're coming to, but I feel like this parable is such a great one for self-examination.
Yeah.
And we'll get more into that as we get into the explanation of it. But that's what the parables were meant to do. They were meant to teach, but also to instruct you in such a way that you turn it in on yourself and say, this is how this applies to my life. This is how I need to be behaving based on what Jesus just said.
Going along with what you said, Stephanie, verses 11 through 13, it's our responsibility to understand. It's given to those, quote unquote, inside. Here in this text, it's the apostles, but Matthew 16 verse 18 and Acts 2:42, it's to the kingdom, it's to his church, so that would be his Christians.
Something I found, going back to the ears, he who has ears to hear, let him hear. That's a quotation. And from what I found, it said that ears to hear reflects the motif in the Old Testament prophets that many had ears but were deaf to God's voice, which is kind of a hardening of the heart, like you said.
Mm-hmm. What is the quotation from?
This right here refers, which this is not from my Bible, like it's not a reference. This is from the background commentary. It says Isaiah 6:10, 43:8, 44:18, and Ezekiel 12:2. But in my Bible, at the end of verse 9, it says, and he said, well, maybe it's a quotation of him because it says, and he said. Yeah. Sorry about that. That was confusing. Yeah, that was a quote of Jesus, not a quote from the Old Testament.
Okay.
Yeah. But that phrasing reflects things from the Old Testament is what it's saying. So if we're going to move on, then we'll discuss the latter half of this passage, verses 10 through 20. And Dee, you already struck on some of the stuff in 11 through 13. Brittany, do you have anything?
Yeah, so during the parables, or reading them, I just thought it was interesting with this particular parable. Jesus doesn't put a lot of emphasis on the sower. It's not really about the sower, it's about the seed, And when I was studying that and going through it, I thought about 1 Corinthians 3, verses 6 through 8, where pretty much the church at Corinth is fussing over Paul and Apollos, and they're like saying, oh, I'm a disciple of Paul, I'm a disciple of Apollos, I was baptized by this person, I was baptized by that person. And it just kind of made me think, don't get me wrong, there are a lot of great teachers throughout the church, you know what I mean? But the teacher is just a mere servant of God. He's just doing what he's been called to do. He or she, because I said teacher, not preacher. So he or she is just doing what God has told him to do over in Matthew 28, which we call the Great Commission, which is to go into all the world. And so we plant these little seeds, and then, but God gives the increase. And that's what Paul says in verse 6. He said, I planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the increase. And so it's like, it just kind of made me think, like, he didn't put much emphasis on the sower, like, you're doing a good thing, but at the end of the day, like, don't forget, it's not about you. It's about me. It's about my word. It's about my gospel, and the power being in the gospel. Like, that's what saves people. Not because Brittany was a skillful teacher and she was able to teach somebody the Bible, and then, you know, after she taught them the Bible, they got baptized. We rejoice in that, in the fact that the person got baptized and had their sins forgiven. But at the end of the day, Brittany didn't do anything miraculous. There are 100 Brittany's out here. You know, there are 100 D's out here. There are 100 Stephanies out here. We're all doing it. And so I just thought that was interesting when Jesus, he focuses more on the soil and how the seeds fall and how different individuals will or will not receive it. But it really has nothing to do with the sower themselves. So that's something that I noticed, and I thought that was really interesting. And don't get me wrong, I love a good preacher. I love a good teacher. You know, I have a favorite preacher. I'm not biased because he's my husband.
No.
You know, but I'm just saying, like, you know, we can get impressed by those things, and there are things. I'm not saying that you can't be impressed, but I am also saying, you know, there's nothing special about them. It's okay to give a compliment and everything, but don't get so starstruck that you forget about the word and what the word does.
Right. And along those lines, just as everyday people, like you said, teachers, we've got to make sure that Jesus is what's seen when people look at us and the teaching that we're doing, that it's not look at what I'm doing, it's look at what Jesus did, and this is why I'm telling you this. You know, we should stand in the shadow of the cross, not the other way around.
Yeah.
All right, so moving on, verse 12, there is a quoting there of Isaiah 6, verses 9 through 10 by Jesus. And it said, you know, they may indeed see but not perceive, and may indeed hear but not understand, lest they should turn and be forgiven. Sometimes, you know, people take verses out of context, and I think people get really confused by this kind of passage where it's like, Jesus, you know, they didn't want them to turn and be forgiven, you know, and it's kind of like what Dee brought up earlier. People have hard hearts. You know, we look at the instance of Pharaoh, you know, back in the Old Testament, where he had a hard heart and God allowed it to be hardened even further. And God uses those same people, and the people that he's talking about right here are the people that will carry out God's will in crucifying Christ.
Yeah.
Just like God used Pharaoh's hardness to bring people out of Egypt. You know, makes me think about things like we just had a sermon on Romans 8:28. You know, all things work together for good to them that are called according to his purpose, you know, and it doesn't mean that everything is great, but God can use bad things and bring them back about for the ultimate good of the world. And this right here that he's talking about is the best thing that's ever happened for humanity in all time and ever will. There will be nothing that comes close to this. And he uses their hardness of heart in order that we might be saved.
But look what Jesus says in verse 11, prior to quoting Isaiah. He says, to you it has been given to know the mystery of the kingdom of God, but to those who are outside, all things come in parables. You know, in Ephesians 3, we studied that last season. Paul talks about the kingdom, about the mystery, about the mystery revealed, and that would be, you know, the kingdom to come because of Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection. So he's saying to you, now he's telling the 12, to you it's been given to know the mystery, because he's going to give them the keys to the kingdom. So you're going to know what this is all about. So to those outside, they're not yet in the kingdom. It's spoken in parables. So those who are truly, the multitude coming after him, the ones that really are coming in faith, believe that he is the Son of God, even though this is pretty early on, some of them believe something, that they're coming to him wanting to be healed, wanting to be forgiven. You know, we studied earlier about the paralytic coming through the roof. So those who want to know, who are seeking him diligently,
Mm-hmm.
will understand these parables. So he's quoting from the Old Testament, bringing them back, saying, hey, seeing that they may see and not perceive, and hearing that they may hear and not understand, lest they should turn. So he wants to forgive them. So he's, if they're seeking, they're going to know what this is all about.
Right. And
Right.
that's what it says. I mean, and the parables of Jesus were going to make sense to the people that were pursuing the truth, that actually put in the work to find out what it meant. It wasn't going to make sense to people that are just standing there and
that
who have
applies
hard.
today. Yeah.
Very true. It does apply
Yeah.
today to the Word of God.
Yeah. And he is the Word.
Yes, he is. I just love, I don't know, I guess because it is explained, like you said, that not all of them are explained. And so I love the way that it goes into depth on this. And he's explaining it to the people closest to them, which, verse 13, he says, do you not understand this parable? How are you going to understand all the parables if you don't understand this one? And so he explains that how, the seed is the word. And then it goes ahead and breaks down the different soils and how the word is not absorbed, but what's the word I'm looking for? The word is taken by those soils or rejected by those soils. And when you look at verse 17, that applies right there specifically to his apostles and his disciples. When, I wonder when it got to that, if that is something that would have affected them personally, like in their minds, which that verse says, and they have no root in themselves, but endure for a while. Then when tribulation or persecution rises on account of the word, immediately they fall away. And these are the people that he chose. We talked about the purposes for which they were chosen in the last chapter. It said they were chosen to be with him and to go out and preach the word, and of course perform miracles as well. But I mean, for them, this would have been something very close to them, because as the church is established, the persecution just grows kind of in tandem with the growth of the church. The persecution, you see it, they're just neck and neck, I guess you would say.
I was just, about all the different soils. You got the seed that falls by the wayside, the stony ground, and then you got the good ground and everything. And I was kind of thinking, I like to believe that the word of God, like I'm the good ground. You know what I mean? Like I want.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, but I kind of wonder sometimes, like, I'm not a farmer by any means. I be trying to grow simple herbs and I kill them. So, but I was just kind of thinking, the good ground, right? So it's the ground that receives the seed and brings forth an abundant harvest. So they hear the word, they soak it up, they love it, they thrive on it, and then they go teach others. And I would like to think that that's where I'm at in my life. But then as I was reading, I kind of was wondering, do y'all ever feel like, yeah, I'm the good ground, but sometimes my ground might become stony, or my ground might be, might end up being the seed that's fallen by the wayside. You know what I mean? Like, you feel like you're just kind of going through the motions, and sometimes things start happening out of habit, So it's just like every Sunday morning, every Sunday night, and Wednesday, by the grace of God, if I'm not sick, if my family is not sick or anything, you're going to always find us at the church building, right? But I do believe that there are times in my life, I'll speak for myself, in my life, where I feel like, yes, I know why I'm going to church, I know what I'm doing, but I just feel like I'm kind of just going through the motions, And so I was just reading this and I was kind of thinking, I think for the most part, my ground is good ground. I think the seed fell on good ground, but I won't lie. I think there are days that I am the seed that fell on the stony ground, or I'm the seed that fell by the wayside. Does that make sense?
Yes and no. I mean, we have our ebbs and flow throughout our Christian walk, but now I'm not a farmer, but I do garden. And, I can have this great, luscious garden, and I'll go in and every day to go check on it. Some days I'm like, wait, there's weeds here. These weeds weren't here just yesterday, but here they are, full-grown weeds, and so you have to pull them out. And then there's even times, like if it rains a lot, it'll draw up, I guess you could say, rocks that were underneath the soil that I didn't know were there. So I don't know if it's so much that, because, these are all individual seeds, individual soils, I guess you could say. And, we know people of exactly these kinds of soils. The only one I think, if I remember right, the only one here is that doesn't become fruitful, I guess you could say. Well, like Satan takes away the ones that are sown by the wayside, and then the ones by the thorns, they get choked and becomes unfruitful. So like the other two, they stumble, like the one on stony ground, they stumble, but it's not like they can't grow.
Right.
So, but I guess my whole point is there are things in our good soil, in our good hearts, the rocks that'll appear from the rain, or the weeds that grow up overnight and they almost choking a plant's life out of it. So that doesn't mean the soil's still not good. It's just things that need to be taken out.
Yeah. Which is, well, maybe it didn't come out that way. That's how I meant it, though.
I knew what you meant, because when I was reading over it just now, I was thinking, that could be, all of us at some point or another. But going back reading it, I was thinking, no, these are individual type soils.
Gotcha.
Right. And so I was also interested in soil. So like I did research on soil, like a total nerd, because I love to read. And I found a couple different things that I didn't know. One thing from soils.org. Soils change with age. Did y'all know that?
Yes.
Soils what?
Change with age.
Yes.
And so
I
I kind of heard this. We have some farming friends that are up in the Delaware area, and they farm soybeans, but some years they'll farm corn instead.
Mm-hmm.
And
to replenish the nutrients.
yes, to replenish the nutrients. And a lot of times, like from what I read on which is a completely different website, it's a blog, but it's called Cover Cropping. And this one is Fresh Harvest GA for Georgia, I guess. Is that the cover cropping doesn't always produce really a good crop, but it replenishes the soil so that you have a better crop following. But what soils.org said was that as soil ages, it gradually starts to look different from its parental material. And that's because soil is dynamic. It has different components, minerals, waters, air, organic matter, and organisms, and those all constantly change. So some components are added, some are lost, and some move from place to place within the soil. And then it goes on to say that CLORPT, climate, organisms, relief, which is landscape, parent material, and time, CLORPT, if you want to shorten it, that soils differ from one part of the world to another, and even from one part of a backyard to another. I didn't know that.
Yep.
And they differ because of where and how they are formed. And of course, you can see where my mind is jumping with this. All of our soils are different. I mean, it says that in this parable, but I mean, if we want to apply that today, where and how we're formed, some of us are formed younger as Christians. Some of us are formed in adulthood. Some of us in our twilight years. And that is going to change the kind of soil, like our soils are going to differ because of that. And the further we get away from the parent material, which would be God, the more, I guess, corrupted, or what's the word I'm looking for? Stale. Yeah, obviously soils diminished. The more diminished the soil would be, nutrient density wouldn't be as good. And as Christians, the further we get away from God, the drier our soil becomes, the less nutrient dense it becomes.
Yeah.
And I like in the end of this where it talks about the good soil and the ones who hear the word and accept it, they bear fruit, 30-fold, 60-fold, and 100-fold. And something I found on that, sorry, I know I'm spewing a bunch of nerd stuff. Y'all bear with me for a second. I just love all this. But it said...
And that's why I garden.
Yes. But it said that 30-fold, 60-fold, and 100-fold are tremendously good harvests from Galilean soil. The fertile Jordan Valley normally yielded between 10 and less often 100-fold. So 100-fold is not necessarily a miraculous harvest, but it is an astonishing one. But for more of Palestine, the average yield was 7.5 to 10-fold.
Wow.
And so these would be amazing numbers to them. That would be like a stark contrast, really. But of course,
Showing that nothing is impossible with God.
right. The yield is worth the sown seed that was wasted. You know, you think about all the seed here that it talks about that it didn't make it. You know, the rocks, the thorns, and being thrown on kind of the footpath in between. All those things aren't going to produce anything, but a seed, when it brings forth fruit, produces more seed. And so it's going to have, 30-fold. And here, it said that the typical, was in between 7.5 to 10-fold. So for every one seed, you'd get 10 more seeds. And so this is huge. For every, fruit that you have, there's going to be 30-fold and 60-fold and 100-fold. But it got me thinking, what is the fruit here? I mean, does it necessarily have to mean converted souls?
I don't think so, not necessarily. I mean, because I also think about the fruit of your labor, I guess. So like I think if so somebody taught me, and it fell on good soil, right? So now I'm trying to stick with it. I want to go with it. I want to teach others, I think sometimes the fruit of that could be me just trying to teach other people, because like the parables clearly say, we're going to sow the seeds. That doesn't mean that it's always going to fall on good soil. Some of it's going to fall by the wayside. Some of it's going to fall on stony ground. And just because I planted a seed and the soil rejected it, that doesn't mean that my fruit is necessarily bad. You get what I'm saying? Like what I'm trying to do, the fruit of my labor, that doesn't mean that it's bad. It just means the ground that I tried to produce on just wasn't feeling it, like that soil isn't interested. He or she is not gonna produce what needs to be done. It's not gonna always fall on good soil. The soil, which is the heart of these individuals, their heart has to be ready and willing to accept this. That doesn't mean that I stop planting. That doesn't mean that I don't keep trying to water. But at some point, if my soil isn't going to yield the fruit, then I've got to move on, So I don't think the fruit here is necessarily resulting in baptisms, because that's not always the case. And that's just, there's no way on this side of life am I going to talk to every single person that I talk to is going to want to be baptized. I know that's not realistic. You get what I'm saying? But
Right.
Because that's reality, that doesn't stop me from wanting to continue to plant and to water those seeds.
Right. I agree with that. I don't think that it's necessarily converted souls.
No, because we got the fruit of the Spirit, which seems like the obvious answer, right? But, my soil is diminishing, so you may have to, replenish it with some love, replenish it with some peace, or, teach me to be a Titus 2 person,
Right.
So there is more than converted souls.
Right. And I think, what I was talking about earlier with the soils and them taking a rest, just like the soil, we need rest. Sometimes we are going to be, we should always be scattering the seed, so to speak. But we need to know within the soil as well when it needs a rest. Like, am I trying to bring forth this amazing, which obviously we are trying to bring souls to Christ. But am I expecting this massive yield, or am I going to be okay with scattering like a, I can't even think of the word of that thing I talked about, the cropping thing. Yeah, it's a cropping of some sort where it's not going to do as much, but it's going to replenish that soil. Sometimes, I think that's a tact thing. We have to be tactful with how we speak to people, how we plant the word in others' hearts.
Don't overwater it.
Right.
Like I said, I'm not a gardener, I'm not a farmer. But one thing I did learn at the height of the pandemic, because everybody was trying to find something to do because we were all stuck in the house. And so I fell in along with the trend, and I went to go get some flowers, and I did a little bit of landscaping, and it was so pretty. And then I realized, Brittany, you can't water the plants every single day, honey. You're killing you're killing the seed. So I did learn that, like, you can overwater, and the same is true with the word. And I like the word that you use when you talked about replenish. Like, everybody needs to be replenished. And those seeds that we tried to plant at some point, just because they rejected it right then and there, doesn't mean that you can't go back and revisit it. You know what I'm saying? Doesn't mean that you can't go back and try and water again and see if some fruit comes from that. You know, sometimes you have to give it a break. Let the soil do its thing. Let it go through some trials. Let it get ready, But at the end of the day, we're not God. We can't make them do anything that, they don't want to do. But you can continue to water throughout. Just don't overwater, because you'll kill them.
Don't drown them. But that's the thing. That's the
don't
beautiful
drown
thing. God is responsible for the increase. That's not our job. We don't have to worry
Yeah.
about that. We don't need to put that pressure on ourselves.
Right. Yeah.
So we want to be good soil, and we want to watch for good soil in others.
You can cultivate good soil too.
Right? Can't you transplant things?
That's something different. But
Yeah. Okay.
right now, I've got like, I've got like 100 seeds planted, and they're in those little, the little pods. But the garden that they're going into and the pots they're going into, I'm cultivating it. I'm getting it ready. I'm putting crushed eggshells in it. I'm putting coffee grinds in it. I'm putting, homemade fertilizer in it. I'm getting that soil ready because I used it last year. It's replenished. It's depleted of some of the nutrients. I've got compost in it. So I'm getting that soil ready, getting it good so that when it's time to put the seedling in there or put a new seed in there, it'll grow. Lord willing, every spring I'm like, please, Lord, please let these seeds grow. and it's the same way with souls, not soils, souls.
Yeah.
Like, please, Lord, let this be good soil. Let it be good. And if not, let me do something for it to help cultivate it so the seed will take.
Exactly. And like, we can't just expect to scatter seed on
dirt,
depleted soil and expect it to take. We need to build those relationships and give that soil the nourishment it needs before, because these are hard truths that are in the Bible. I mean, Jesus knew that. He spoke on that, and we know that as well. So
and some seeds need humidity to grow. And think about it. You get that soil ready. The seed needs to go through some hot stuff. It needs a hot environment in order to finally sprout. Some seeds don't. So it's just, the word's good. It's just the soil, if the soil's humid enough for the seed. Okay, I'm finished with my gardening lesson today.
I like it.
Listen, all I want to say is I appreciate how y'all are breaking this down, because normally, D, is me and you looking at Stephanie when she's using all these big words, and we're like, what does that mean? And today it's you and Stephanie talking about this gardening and cultivating, and I'm like, what does that mean? Like, I just told y'all I kill all the plants that I try and grow. Like,
I'm the
y'all
same way
keep
with
wanting to
plants.
talk about-
I kill them. I have a Christmas cactus that I haven't killed yet.
Ooh,
been-
we're in March.
Yeah, we're in March. It's not dead
Wow.
yet. But I'm not overwatering it because Dee told me how to take care of it. So it hasn't died yet. We're good. All right. So where do we see the love of Christ in this passage? Dee?
I see it in verse 13. I see his patience and his love, and it's a rebuke, but it's a soft rebuke. It's like, do you not understand the parable? How then will you understand all the parables? I want you to understand this. I want you to understand how much I love you. Please understand this so that you can share it with others. So I see his love in verse 13.
All right. Brittany?
I see it in the beginning where we brought up the point about how Jesus doesn't put emphasis on the sower. It's more about the ground or the soil. And that just, it's kind of one of those things that will humble anybody. It's like, look, don't get too full of yourself, dude. Like, you might be able to teach a Bible class. You might be able to preach a lesson. But Brittany, baby, there is nothing special about you. Everything special is in the word when it comes to teaching. Like, obviously, I think I'm special in the eyes of God because he created me, so I don't want that to get misunderstood. I do think I'm a special individual. But when it comes to teaching others the word of God, I have no power. All the power is in the is in his word. And so I'm a sower. Yes, I'm going to sow the best that I can. I'm going to cultivate. I'm going to try to not overwater these different soils and these different seeds that I plant. But at the end of the day, there's nothing that I have done that is just overly special, because the power is in his word, not in Brittany. So I think it's a very humbling thought, and it's one of those things that I think we all need to remember, because I think at some point we can all get a little arrogant or feel ourselves, and God's like, no, it's really not about you. You can't do anything without me, and I have the words of life. You don't. So
All right. And I just see it in the fact that that the seed is provided for us. It's not something that's hard to find.
yeah.
It doesn't cost us anything. In fact, it cost Jesus his life and it was free for us. But the fact that there's no pressure there, which I think is kind of the same thing you're hitting at, Brittany. There's no pressure there for me to come up with what I need to scatter that seed. Like I've been given a complete instruction manual on how to do it, and the seed is provided. And I just have to do as instructed. And I want to say it's crazy simple, but I know that's not exactly true. It is easy to do when you want to do it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
better.
Yeah. All right. That wraps it up for us on this episode of To Know the Love of Christ. We'd like to thank you for joining us again today. Of course, if you have any comments or questions, please feel free to contact us. We'd love to study with you or connect you to someone who's closer to you. As always, we hope you will seek to know the love of Christ in your own life. Until next time,
Bye.
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 You can reach out to us on Facebook or Instagram. We would love to hear from you. And be sure to click like and share this episode with family and friends. In doing so, you're sharing the love of Christ.